"Let's stay friends, you're too important," she begged after cheating. I said sure, then dated her therapist. First session after the breakup? I was 29, spending my weekdays studying coral reef restoration patterns in university lab tanks and my weekends teaching scuba certification to tourists who thought they could master buoyancy control in a single afternoon. I'd been with Amber for 3 years, watching her coordinate corporate wellness programs for tech startups while she complained endlessly about executives who treated meditation breaks like productivity metrics rather than genuine mental health initiatives. I thought we had something solid until I discovered she'd been having an affair with Logan, her yoga instructor, for 4 months through encrypted messages hidden in her meditation app of all places, complete with photos and plans for secret meetups that happened while I was supposedly working late on my coral bleaching research. The irony wasn't lost on me that someone who preached mindfulness and inner peace to stressed-out programmers had been systematically deceiving me while I collected data on dying coral systems that required more trust and patience than she'd ever shown our relationship. I confronted her at our usual oceanfront cafe, the one where she always ordered overpriced acai bowls and complained about the seagulls being too aggressive while I ordered simple coffee and watched surfers practice their forms in the distance. I watched her face cycle through surprise, denial, and finally tears that looked genuine until I realized she was probably crying more for getting caught than for hurting me, especially when her first concern was whether I'd already told any of our mutual friends about her betrayal. She broke down completely, mascara streaking down her cheeks as she begged me not to throw away what we'd built together, claiming Logan was just a temporary mistake brought on by work stress and feeling emotionally disconnected from me due to my long hours in the lab studying reef systems that fascinated me more than her latest workplace drama about difficult clients and demanding wellness metrics. She insisted we could rebuild trust through couples therapy, that our relationship was too important to just abandon over what she called a momentary lapse in judgment, and that she'd already cut all contact with Logan while promising complete transparency about her phone, her schedule, and everything else moving forward. I sat there watching her performance, noting how she gripped my hands across the table with the same desperation I'd seen in marine life samples when their environment became toxic, and despite feeling like my chest had been hollowed out with a rusty spoon, I found myself agreeing to try professional counseling because some part of me still believed 3 years of shared experiences meant something worth salvaging. She'd already researched therapists through her company's employee assistance program and suggested Dr. Elena Vasquez, a relationship counselor with impressive credentials who specialized in rebuilding communication and trust between partners who'd experienced betrayal and emotional disconnect in their relationships. During our first consultation the following week, Dr. Vasquez explained her therapeutic approach while Amber clung to my hand and made promises about her commitment to healing that sounded suspiciously similar to the corporate wellness presentations she gave to unmotivated employees who were required to attend mindfulness workshops. I found myself studying Dr. Vasquez's calm professionalism, the way she asked thoughtful questions about our relationship history and actually listened to my answers about feeling like a supporting character in Amber's personal development journey rather than an equal partner in something we were building together. Something about the therapist's genuine interest in understanding both sides of our story felt different from the performative concern Amber had been showing since getting caught, and I left that first session feeling cautiously hopeful that maybe professional guidance could help us navigate back to whatever we'd had before yoga instructors and secret messaging apps had destroyed the foundation of trust we'd spent years building together. Dr. Vasquez had this way of asking questions that made me think about things I'd never examined before, like why I'd been so willing to accept Amber's explanations for her increasingly distant behavior over the past year, and whether I'd been making excuses for someone who'd been slowly checking out of our relationship long before Logan appeared on the scene with his flexible schedule and convenient availability during my research hours at the marine lab where I spent most of my passionate energy studying complex marine ecosystems that required the kind of patient dedication and genuine commitment Amber had never shown toward building anything lasting with me. During our weekly sessions over the next 2 months, I found myself increasingly drawn to Dr. Vasquez's insightful questions and compassionate listening, especially when she asked thoughtful follow-up questions about my coral reef restoration research that showed she genuinely remembered details from previous sessions while Amber repeatedly arrived late, checked her phone constantly, and provided superficial answers that revealed her lack of genuine commitment to change. Dr. Vasquez, who was 32 and specialized in trauma recovery and relationship dynamics, demonstrated remarkable insight into my career goals and personal values, asking about specific projects I was working on and how the methodical nature of marine research reflected my approach to relationships and life planning. Meanwhile, Amber continued secretly texting Logan and 2 other men she'd met through dating apps, claiming she needed emotional support during this difficult time while I poured my heart out about feeling betrayed and questioning whether I was somehow inadequate as a partner. Through careful therapeutic questioning, Dr. Vasquez helped me recognize patterns of emotional manipulation in my relationship with Amber, like how she would deflect responsibility for her actions by claiming I was too focused on my work, or how she'd make me feel guilty for wanting basic honesty and transparency in our relationship. I began looking forward to therapy sessions not for relationship healing, but for the profound conversations with Dr. Vasquez about life philosophy, career aspirations, and personal growth that I'd never experienced with Amber, who seemed more interested in discussing her latest wellness trends and social media strategies than understanding what actually motivated me. During one particularly revealing session, Dr. Vasquez asked me to describe what I found most fulfilling about my marine biology work, and I spent 20 minutes explaining the delicate balance required to restore damaged coral reefs, how patience and consistent care could bring dying ecosystems back to life, while Amber sat beside me scrolling through her Instagram feed with obvious boredom. Dr. Vasquez maintained appropriate professional boundaries despite our obvious intellectual and emotional connection, but I could see in her eyes a genuine appreciation for the passion I brought to my research and the methodical way I approached problems, qualities that Amber had increasingly criticized as obsessive and boring over the past year of our relationship. What struck me most was how Dr. Vasquez would ask follow-up questions that showed she was actually listening and processing what I said, unlike Amber, who would nod along and then immediately redirect conversations back to her own concerns about work stress and feeling unappreciated by her startup clients. I started noticing how Amber would arrive at sessions with prepared talking points that sounded rehearsed, like she was performing recovery rather than actually engaging with the process, while Dr. Vasquez would gently challenge her superficial responses and try to dig deeper into her motivations and patterns of behavior. The contrast became even more apparent when Dr. Vasquez asked us both to complete homework assignments between sessions, like writing letters to each other about our feelings and expectations, and Amber would either forget completely or dash off something generic at the last minute while I would spend hours crafting thoughtful responses that attempted to bridge the growing emotional distance between us. I began to realize that Dr. Vasquez understood the scientific mindset that drove my passion for marine conservation, how I needed concrete evidence and measurable progress to feel confident in any relationship, whether professional or personal. She would reference specific details from our previous conversations, like how I'd mentioned feeling energized when explaining complex ecological concepts to my scuba certification students, and use those insights to help me understand why Amber's vague promises and inconsistent actions left me feeling so unsettled. Amber, meanwhile, seemed increasingly frustrated with the therapeutic process, especially when Dr. Vasquez would ask her to examine her own behavior patterns rather than focusing solely on what I needed to change to make her feel more emotionally fulfilled. During our 6th session, Dr. Vasquez asked us each to share one thing we genuinely appreciated about the other person, and while I talked about Amber's initial enthusiasm for learning about marine conservation, Amber struggled to come up with anything specific about me beyond generic comments about my stability and reliability. The exercise revealed just how superficial her understanding of my interests and goals had become, and I watched Dr. Vasquez take careful notes as Amber fumbled through explanations about why she'd stopped asking about my research projects and stopped showing interest in the environmental issues that shaped my career choices and personal values. During our 8th session, Dr. Vasquez presented evidence that completely shattered any remaining illusions I had about Amber's commitment to our relationship and the therapeutic process itself. She had discovered that Amber was using insights from our sessions to manipulate me more effectively, including recorded conversations where Amber bragged to friends about playing the therapy game to keep me financially supporting her while she explored other options with wealthier men from her corporate networking events. Dr. Vasquez explained that she'd been legally required to investigate after noticing inconsistencies in Amber's stories and behavior patterns that suggested she was actively undermining the therapeutic process rather than participating in genuine healing work. Amber had secretly installed recording apps on my phone and shared private details from our sessions with Logan and her new wealthy target, Marcus, a venture capitalist she'd met at a startup conference who owned a Tesla and a downtown penthouse that made my modest researcher salary look pathetic by comparison. The recordings Dr. Vasquez played were devastating to hear, with Amber laughing about how easy it was to make me feel guilty for her cheating by claiming she felt emotionally neglected, and how she was using therapy sessions to gather ammunition for future arguments while positioning herself as the victim of my workaholic tendencies and boring lifestyle preferences. When Dr. Vasquez confronted Amber with this evidence during our session, she exploded with accusations that the therapist was unprofessional and trying to break us up, revealing her true manipulative nature as she threatened to file complaints against both me and Dr. Vasquez for conspiring against her mental health recovery. The mask completely slipped as Amber screamed about how I was too boring and predictable compared to Marcus, who took her to expensive restaurants and bought her designer clothes without making her feel guilty about the cost, unlike my careful budgeting and preference for quiet evenings discussing marine conservation research and environmental policy issues she found tedious. I sat there listening to her venomous words, finally understanding that I'd been emotionally abused for years by someone who saw me as nothing more than a stable backup plan while she searched for someone who could fund the lifestyle she felt she deserved without requiring her to contribute anything meaningful in return. Dr. Vasquez maintained her professional composure throughout Amber's tirade, taking notes and occasionally asking clarifying questions that only made Amber angrier and more revealing about her calculated approach to our relationship and her complete disregard for the emotional damage she'd caused. I realized with crystal clarity that the woman I'd loved and planned to build a future with had never actually existed, and that I'd been desperately trying to save something that was rotten from the beginning rather than acknowledging the obvious signs that Amber had checked out emotionally long before Logan entered the picture with his flexible schedule and willingness to enable her selfish behavior. When I formally ended our relationship right there in the therapy office, Amber immediately shifted to desperate pleading, claiming she would do anything to save our connection and that I was too important to lose as a friend since I provided emotional stability she couldn't find elsewhere with her wealthy targets who only wanted her for superficial reasons and couldn't offer the genuine care I'd foolishly provided for 3 years. In a moment of strategic clarity that surprised even me, I agreed to stay friends while secretly knowing this would give me opportunities to document her continued manipulative behavior and protect future victims from the same emotional manipulation I'd endured while believing I was building something real with someone who actually cared about my well-being and professional goals. Dr. Vasquez later explained that my decision to maintain minimal contact was actually psychologically sound, as it would allow me to observe Amber's true nature without the emotional investment of a romantic relationship, while also providing evidence of her patterns if she ever tried to cause problems for me professionally or personally in the future. What struck me most about the whole devastating revelation was how Dr. Vasquez handled the situation with such professional grace and ethical integrity, explaining each step of her investigation and the legal requirements she'd followed while uncovering Amber's deception. She made it clear that protecting the therapeutic process from abuse was paramount, and that Amber's behavior represented a serious violation of the trust that made counseling effective for people who genuinely wanted to heal and grow. I found myself genuinely grateful to Dr. Vasquez for her thorough approach and her courage in confronting difficult truths, qualities that stood in stark contrast to Amber's superficial approach to everything from our relationship to her own personal development. As we wrapped up that final session with Amber storming out and threatening lawsuits she would never follow through on, Dr. Vasquez offered to continue working with me individually to process the trauma of discovering I'd been systematically manipulated for years while believing I was in a loving partnership. 3 weeks after ending therapy and my relationship with Amber, Dr. Vasquez contacted me through professional channels to check on my emotional recovery, leading to a coffee meeting that transformed into a 4-hour conversation about marine conservation, her research in behavioral psychology, and our shared passion for environmental activism and authentic human connections. I was initially surprised by her outreach, but she explained that she'd been concerned about the psychological impact of discovering such systematic manipulation and wanted to ensure I had adequate support during my healing process without crossing any professional boundaries. What started as a professional follow-up quickly revealed our remarkable intellectual compatibility when she mentioned her volunteer work with sea turtle rescue organizations and her genuine fascination with my published research on coral bleaching prevention, asking specific questions about methodology that showed she'd actually read my papers. I found myself explaining complex ecological concepts to someone who not only understood the scientific methodology but asked insightful questions about the broader environmental implications of my work, something Amber had never shown even a pretense of interest in during our 3 years together. Dr. Vasquez shared her own research into behavioral psychology patterns, particularly how people with narcissistic tendencies exploit therapeutic settings to manipulate partners and family members, and I was struck by how naturally our conversation flowed between scientific rigor and personal passion for making meaningful contributions to the world. As we talked, I realized that Elena, as she insisted I call her outside the professional context, represented everything I'd been seeking in a partner without even knowing it, someone whose intelligence matched her compassion and whose career dedication rivaled my own commitment to marine research and environmental protection. She told me about her volunteer work with environmental justice organizations, how she'd gotten involved in sea turtle conservation after studying the psychological impacts of habitat destruction on coastal communities, and I felt that familiar excitement I got when discussing complex scientific problems with someone who truly understood the interconnectedness of ecological and human systems. Meanwhile, Amber had been bombarding me with increasingly frantic messages about missing our special friendship and demanding to know why I wasn't providing the emotional support she needed during her healing journey, completely oblivious to the irony of expecting care from someone she'd systematically deceived and manipulated for years. Elena helped me recognize Amber's continued manipulation tactics while supporting my decision to maintain minimal contact for documentation purposes, never pressuring me to cut ties completely but instead helping me understand the psychological patterns that made Amber's behavior so predictable and ultimately self-defeating. Our relationship blossomed through shared volunteer work at weekend beach cleanups, deep philosophical discussions about the ethics of environmental research, and mutual respect for each other's professional dedication that created the kind of authentic partnership I'd never experienced with Amber's performative affection and calculated emotional responses. Elena understood the methodical nature of scientific work, the patience required for long-term research projects, and the satisfaction that came from contributing to something larger than personal ambition, qualities that resonated with my approach to both career and relationships in ways that felt natural and sustainable. What amazed me most was how Elena would reference specific details from our conversations weeks later, asking thoughtful follow-up questions about my research progress and remembering the names of my graduate students and the particular coral species I was studying, showing the kind of genuine interest and emotional investment that I desperately craved but never received from Amber, who could barely remember what I did for work. Elena also demonstrated remarkable emotional intelligence in how she handled the delicate transition from professional relationship to personal connection, always checking in about my comfort level and ensuring that our growing attraction didn't compromise the healing work I was doing after discovering Amber's systematic manipulation. She introduced me to her colleagues at environmental conferences, proudly explaining my research to other scientists who were genuinely interested in coral restoration efforts, creating opportunities for professional collaboration that enriched both my work and my sense of belonging in a community that valued scientific contribution over financial success. The contrast with Amber became even more stark when I realized that Elena never made me feel guilty for working late on research deadlines, never complained about spending weekends at the marine lab, and actually seemed energized by my passion for environmental protection rather than seeing it as competition for her attention. Amber discovered my relationship with Elena through social media detective work and launched a campaign to destroy both our reputations, filing false ethics complaints claiming Elena had seduced her client and I had abandoned a vulnerable person during mental health recovery, while simultaneously trying to win me back with desperate romantic gestures, including surprise visits to my research facility where she would create scenes that embarrassed me in front of my colleagues and graduate students. Her complaints backfired spectacularly when Elena's professional board discovered Amber's recorded admissions of manipulating therapy sessions and using me financially, plus evidence of her continued affairs with multiple men throughout our relationship and alleged recovery period that completely undermined her claims of being a vulnerable victim seeking genuine help. The investigation revealed that Amber had been systematically documenting her own deceptive behavior through voice recordings and text messages that she'd apparently kept as some kind of twisted trophy collection, providing ironclad evidence of her calculated manipulation that made her ethics complaints look like the desperate revenge tactics they actually were. Meanwhile, Amber's new target Marcus dropped her after discovering her history of manipulation when my marine biology colleagues shared viral videos of her publicly berating me at research fundraisers, calling my career boring fish stuff and demanding I pursue real money in corporate consulting instead of wasting time on environmental research that would never make us wealthy. The videos showed Amber at her absolute worst, interrupting my presentations about coral restoration to loudly complain about how my dedication to marine conservation was holding back our financial future, creating such uncomfortable scenes that event organizers had to intervene and ask her to leave multiple academic conferences. Amber lost her wellness coordinator position when her company reviewed her behavior and discovered she'd been using employee assistance program resources to facilitate personal manipulation rather than genuine mental health support, essentially stealing therapeutic services to enable her systematic emotional abuse of partners and family members. Her desperate attempts to reconnect with Logan also failed when he revealed he recorded their conversations about using me as a backup plan and emotional ATM, sharing these recordings with me as evidence of her systematic deception that went far deeper than simple infidelity and extended into calculated financial and emotional exploitation. The recordings were particularly damaging because they showed Amber laughing about how easy it was to manipulate someone who actually cared about environmental issues and scientific research, mocking my dedication to marine conservation as naive and exploitable rather than admirable and meaningful. Logan had apparently grown uncomfortable with Amber's increasingly aggressive manipulation tactics and her demands that he help her extract more money from me through fake emergencies and manufactured crises that required immediate financial assistance. What struck me most was how Amber had created an entire network of enablers and accomplices who were all eventually disgusted by her behavior, suggesting that her pattern of manipulation was so extreme and systematic that even other morally questionable people found it appalling. Elena helped me process these revelations with remarkable professional insight, explaining how Amber's behavior represented textbook narcissistic personality disorder with antisocial tendencies that made her genuinely dangerous to anyone who showed her kindness or vulnerability. The most disturbing aspect was discovering that Amber had been systematically researching my background, my colleagues, and my professional vulnerabilities while we were together, apparently planning contingencies for how to damage my reputation and career if I ever tried to leave her or expose her behavior. She had collected compromising information about my research funding sources, my relationships with department administrators, and even personal details about my family that she could have used to cause maximum damage if her other manipulation tactics failed. Elena explained that this level of calculated preparation indicated someone who was not just manipulative but actively predatory, someone who viewed relationships as strategic opportunities for exploitation rather than genuine emotional connections. The investigation also revealed that Amber had attempted similar tactics with previous partners, suggesting a long-standing pattern of behavior that made me realize I was lucky to have escaped when I did rather than allowing her to continue escalating her manipulative control over my professional and personal life. The most chilling discovery came when Elena's board investigation uncovered evidence that Amber had been secretly photographing confidential documents in my home office, including research proposals, grant applications, and correspondence with colleagues that she could have used to sabotage my career advancement opportunities. Elena helped me understand that this level of premeditation indicated someone who was not just impulsively manipulative but strategically dangerous, someone who treated relationships like intelligence operations rather than emotional partnerships built on mutual trust and respect. The professional board ultimately commended Elena for her ethical handling of the situation and used our case as a training example for therapists dealing with manipulative clients who attempt to weaponize the therapeutic process. Amber's campaign of destruction had not only failed completely but actually strengthened Elena's professional reputation while exposing Amber's behavior to mental health professionals who would be alert to similar manipulation attempts in the future. Jake received a prestigious research grant to study coral restoration in Belize while Elena published a groundbreaking paper on recognizing emotional manipulation in therapeutic settings, using their experience with changed details as a case study that earned national recognition in psychology journals. Their relationship strengthened as they collaborated on a book about healthy relationship dynamics versus manipulative patterns, with Jake contributing scientific methodology and Elena providing psychological expertise that created a uniquely comprehensive approach to understanding emotional abuse in intimate relationships. Meanwhile, Amber created dozens of fake social media accounts to monitor their success and leave bitter comments about Jake abandoning loyal friends and Elena being an unethical predator who stole my boyfriend, revealing her complete inability to accept responsibility for her own destructive behavior. Amber's harassment escalated to showing up at Jake's research presentations claiming to be his concerned friend and spreading rumors that Elena had brainwashed him during therapy, forcing university security to intervene when she disrupted academic conferences with emotional outbursts about their special connection. The incidents became so frequent and disruptive that Jake's department chair had to issue a formal trespass warning against Amber, documenting her behavior for potential legal action if her stalking and harassment continued to interfere with university operations. Through Jake's careful documentation of her behavior patterns, Elena identified Amber's actions as classic stalking with narcissistic personality disorder traits, prompting them to work with campus police and legal advisors to establish protective measures including security escorts at professional events. Amber's behavior became increasingly erratic as she alternated between tearful voicemails begging for friendship and furious accusations that Jake owed her emotional support since she had invested 3 years in their relationship and helped him become more confident in social situations, completely rewriting history to cast herself as the victim. The voicemails became evidence of her deteriorating mental state, with Amber claiming that Jake's success was somehow stolen from her and that Elena had manipulated him into abandoning someone who truly understood his potential before he became arrogant and selfish. Elena's professional expertise proved invaluable in helping Jake understand that Amber's escalating behavior was predictable for someone with her psychological profile, explaining that narcissistic individuals often become dangerously unstable when their carefully constructed self-image is threatened by their victim's success and independence. The most disturbing aspect was how Amber began contacting Jake's family members and professional colleagues with elaborate stories about his mental health, claiming she was worried about his well-being and suggesting that Elena was controlling and potentially dangerous to his career and personal relationships. Jake's parents, who had always been skeptical of Amber's motivations, immediately recognized her manipulation attempts and began forwarding her messages to Jake and Elena as evidence for their growing legal case against her stalking and harassment. The university's legal team became involved when Amber's disruptions began affecting grant funding and research partnerships, with several potential collaborators expressing concern about the professional environment and Jake's ability to maintain focus on important environmental research while dealing with personal drama. Elena helped Jake realize that Amber's behavior represented a calculated attempt to destroy not just their relationship but his entire professional reputation and career trajectory, suggesting someone who was willing to cause maximum damage out of pure vindictive spite rather than any genuine concern for his well-being. The situation reached a critical point when Amber began showing up at Elena's private practice, attempting to schedule appointments under false names and creating scenes in the waiting room that disrupted other patients' therapeutic sessions and violated the safe space that Elena had worked years to establish. These incidents forced Elena to install additional security measures and hire a receptionist specifically trained to handle difficult situations, adding unexpected expenses and stress to her previously peaceful practice. The most alarming development came when Amber began following Jake to his research sites, appearing at remote beach locations where he conducted field work and claiming she was just coincidentally in the area for wellness retreats that didn't actually exist. Jake realized she was tracking his location through various means, possibly including hidden tracking devices or access to his academic calendar, demonstrating a level of premeditation that made her behavior genuinely threatening rather than merely annoying. Elena helped Jake document every incident with photographs, timestamps, and witness statements, building a comprehensive case that showed Amber's behavior was escalating in both frequency and severity while targeting both their professional and personal lives. The documentation revealed a clear pattern of stalking behavior that included monitoring their social media, following them to restaurants and events, and attempting to interfere with their professional opportunities through false complaints and malicious rumors. Jake's research supervisor became so concerned that the university provided him with a security escort for field work and arranged for him to present findings at conferences through secure video connections rather than risking Amber's disruptive presence at in-person events. The stress of dealing with Amber's relentless harassment actually brought Jake and Elena closer together, with both appreciating how the other handled pressure and supported their partner during a difficult period that tested their relationship's foundation in ways they never could have anticipated. 18 months after their breakup, Amber booked an appointment with Elena using a fake name and mental health crisis claims, leading to a shocking confrontation when she arrived for what she believed would be a session to expose Elena's unprofessional behavior and demand she give Jake back to someone who truly understood him. The session, which Elena professionally handled while secretly recording for legal protection, revealed Amber's complete delusion as she alternated between threatening to report Elena for stealing clients' boyfriends and begging her to convince Jake to be friends again since she'd been unemployed and emotionally unstable without his support system. Elena maintained professional composure while documenting Amber's admission to stalking, harassment, and using mental health services fraudulently, providing enough evidence for Jake's attorney to secure a comprehensive restraining order that included social media monitoring and workplace protection. During the confrontation, Amber accidentally revealed she'd been living with her parents and working at a chain store while obsessively planning to win Jake back by pretending to need friendship support during manufactured crises, exposing 2 years of calculated manipulation attempts that showed the extent of her psychological deterioration. The session began normally enough, with Amber maintaining her fake identity and presenting vague symptoms of anxiety and depression that Elena recognized as potentially fabricated but still treated with professional courtesy and appropriate therapeutic interventions. However, as Elena asked standard intake questions about relationship history and support systems, Amber's carefully constructed facade began to crumble when she couldn't maintain consistency in her fictional background story. The breakthrough moment came when Elena asked about previous therapy experiences, and Amber launched into a furious tirade about how she'd been betrayed by a therapist who had seduced her boyfriend and destroyed her life through unethical professional conduct. Elena immediately recognized the description and realized she was face-to-face with the woman who had been stalking and harassing both her and Jake for over a year, but she maintained her professional demeanor while activating the discreet recording system she'd installed after previous security incidents. Amber's delusion became apparent as she demanded that Elena confess to manipulating Jake during therapy and explained her elaborate plan to expose the unethical relationship to state licensing boards, professional organizations, and academic institutions until Elena's career was destroyed and Jake realized his mistake. The most disturbing aspect of the confrontation was how Amber oscillated between threatening Elena's professional destruction and desperately pleading for her help in convincing Jake to resume their friendship, revealing someone who was simultaneously vindictive and pathetically dependent on the very people she was trying to harm. Elena carefully documented Amber's admissions about creating fake social media accounts, following them to professional events, attempting to sabotage Jake's research opportunities, and using fraudulent means to access therapeutic services, all while maintaining the calm professional tone that made Amber feel safe enough to reveal her most incriminating behavior. The session reached its climax when Amber broke down completely and admitted she'd been living in her childhood bedroom for over a year, working minimum wage retail jobs while spending every free moment researching Jake and Elena's activities and planning increasingly desperate schemes to force Jake to acknowledge her importance in his life. She revealed that she'd been telling her parents and coworkers elaborate lies about being in graduate school for psychology so she could better understand Jake's needs, while actually spending her days creating detailed plans for manufactured emergencies that would require Jake to provide emotional support and prove he still cared about her well-being. Elena realized she was dealing with someone who had completely lost touch with reality and was operating under delusions of persecution and entitlement that made her genuinely dangerous to anyone who triggered her obsessive patterns. The most chilling moment came when Amber explained her belief that Jake's success and happiness with Elena were somehow stolen from her, and that she deserved to have her life restored to what it would have been if Elena had never interfered with their destined relationship. When Elena gently suggested that Amber might benefit from genuine mental health treatment, she exploded with accusations that Elena was trying to gaslight her just like she'd gaslight Jake, revealing paranoid thinking patterns that suggested serious psychological deterioration beyond simple manipulation and vindictiveness. The confrontation provided final closure as Elena used the recorded evidence to complete the legal documentation needed for a comprehensive restraining order, while Jake and Elena used the experience to complete their book manuscript about recognizing and escaping emotional manipulation in intimate relationships. The incident gave them powerful real-time evidence of how manipulative individuals escalate their behavior when traditional tactics fail, providing a disturbing but valuable case study for their collaborative research on narcissistic personality disorder and stalking behaviors. Amber faced serious legal consequences for fraud, harassment, and misuse of mental health services, ultimately forced into court-mandated therapy with a different provider who specialized in personality disorders and had access to the extensive documentation of her manipulative behavior patterns. The legal proceedings revealed the full extent of Amber's deception, including evidence that she'd been systematically lying to her parents about her employment, education, and mental health status while using their financial support to fund her stalking activities and fraudulent therapy sessions. Elena's professional board used the case as a landmark example of how to handle clients who attempt to weaponize therapeutic relationships, developing new protocols for identifying and documenting manipulative behavior while protecting both therapists and legitimate clients from predatory individuals who abuse mental health services. The most satisfying outcome was that Amber's elaborate schemes to destroy Jake and Elena's relationship had actually provided them with the evidence and shared experience they needed to become recognized experts in their field, with their book becoming a bestseller and their joint presentations drawing standing ovations at professional conferences nationwide. Jake's research facility became a model for workplace security and harassment prevention, with other universities implementing similar protocols after learning about Amber's systematic attempts to interfere with academic research through stalking and intimidation tactics. Elena's practice evolved into a specialized clinic for survivors of psychological manipulation, with a waiting list of clients who had read their book and wanted to work with someone who truly understood the complex dynamics of narcissistic abuse and recovery from systematic emotional manipulation. The irony wasn't lost on either of them that Amber's vindictive campaign had ultimately created opportunities for them to help thousands of people recognize and escape similar manipulative relationships while building a life together that was more fulfilling than either could have imagined. During their engagement announcement at Jake's research facility, surrounded by marine biology colleagues who had witnessed Amber's disruptive behavior and supported them through the ordeal, they reflected on how Amber's manipulation had inadvertently led them to each other and to their shared mission of helping others heal from emotional abuse while Jake and Elena announced their engagement at his research facility surrounded by marine biology colleagues who celebrate their authentic partnership. By the end of this ordeal, even Amber's most loyal friends were distancing themselves from her after witnessing the extent of her calculated deception and the vindictive cruelty she displayed when her manipulation tactics failed to achieve their intended results.